So I'll go ahead and introduce Katie Craig. She is the Trail Development Coordinator, and she works directly with communities and local governments to manage and fund trail projects throughout Allegheny County. Katie got her bachelor's in sustainable development from Appalachian State University in 2020, which ignited her passion for community development. As a graduate of the AmeriCorps Public Allies program, she partnered directly with an array of nonprofits and communities working on projects surrounding inclusion and equity. Today, Katie works on water and land trail developments throughout the Three Rivers Heritage System, and she has a passion for grant writing and helping communities fund their projects. So if you need anything, any kind of technical assistance regarding that, reach out to Katie. And so what is the project what is the Three Rivers Water Trail Management? So it's a plan that focuses on launch assessment, maintenance recommendations, promotional ideas and opportunities, and identification of sites for expansion. So it sounds like a fantastic effort here in Washington County. It's a huge resource to have, and we're so thankful for you to join us this morning. So I'll hand it over to our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mason. As Mason said, my name is Katie Craig, and I work with Friends of the Riverfront. And I'm joined with my great consultants from Environmental Planning and Design, Carla Luckhart and Andrew Schwartz. We really appreciate you guys for being here. They're going to handle most of this technical aspect of the presentation. I'm just going to talk through right now a little bit about Friends of the Riverfront, what we do, and how we kind of got to start on this management plan journey. So for 33 years, Friends of the Riverfront has worked in Allegheny County to reclaim riverfront space for public use and enjoyment. So today, our organization stewards, develops, and maintains the 33-mile long and counting. We have a lot in development right now, the Three Rivers Heritage Land Trail. So we also work to develop and maintain the nationally designated Three Rivers Water Trail, which our project and webinar today will focus on. Our water trail spans over 67 nautical miles. We touch a lot of different communities, and it's a really, really great resource for people here to use and enjoy. Historically, our organization has focused mainly on land trail development. But as we've kind of grown and gained capacity in recent years, we've been able to shift our focus a bit. And now we're really looking to identify new opportunities of expansion and promotion in our water trail system. A brief overview on funding and acknowledgements. The project was funded by DCNR under the Community Conservation Partnership Program, as well as the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development helped to fund this project as well. We have acknowledgements from our steering committee and our interviewers that Carla and AJ worked hard to contact. And so we've had a big group of people working together on this project. And for this project, we focused on 4 key elements: assessment of current sites, accessibility modifications, expansion, and promotional opportunities. So I'm going to hand it over to our consultants, and thank you, guys.
Carla, can you share?
Do you not see the screen?
No, we don't see the screen.
Oh.
I see it.
So Katie, apologize. I think she was flipping the slides.
I see it. Yeah.
You see it? Okay.
You can see it?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, I can't see it.
Huh.
All right, we'll do this naked. Carla, go ahead. In terms of the first slide.
Yes, the management plan.
Yeah, this is to build upon what Katie kind of laid out. Just as any plan, there's a series of kind of foundational goals that the plan is really intended to achieve. And one of the common themes or key themes that came out as we were doing, as Katie had mentioned, interviews, survey responses in terms of, we'll say, Joe Q Public, which probably was biased towards the paddling community, but it is what it is, was the whole notion of having additional connectivity. And I think one of the things related to the connectivity, it wasn't just about expansion, but this notion of having a more diverse audience of people that can enjoy the water trail, which I believe is a kind of a different mindset than in the past. I think most people in the past looked at the Three Rivers Water Trail as a place to go canoe or kayak. In many cases, that probably is the predominance of the users, but so many people just want to get to the river and just enjoy the river. They don't necessarily have to be in the water. And so the idea of, as we get further in some of this analysis of the kind of the core, how do I say it, work tasks, was looking at equity in terms of broadening the audience, but even how do I navigate from somebody with a disability or somebody with limited mobility, that they still can enjoy the river. And so there was a whole series of goals that kind of spun off in terms of that whole mindset in terms of what we would be able to try to achieve through this plan itself. Carla, you want to go to the next slide? And what is this one? This is really hard. What is the slide?
These are existing conditions and
Yes.
analysis.
Yes. And I just emailed you the PowerPoint if you want
All
to
right.
use it for reference.
Hold on here. Let's do that because that solves a lot of problems. All right. Make it a lot more simple. Goals. All right. So the first existing conditions was to look at literally where we had access. There's about 32 to 33, depending upon how you want to count some of the access points. We have one site that actually has two separate launch areas, but it's the same geographic area. So when I say how you want to count that, we literally visited every one of those. And what we did in this one, friends of the Riverfront, over the years has been very good at doing a lot of their mapping in GIS. And so what we try to do is build upon their GIS information that they have and now integrate the water trail information as well. We created a little app that allowed us to literally go out to the site with a phone or with a little iPad and take photos and punch in locations for where we had a bench, a trash can, a sign, a kayak, a canoe rack, the launch, be able to record the conditions of that. So that all went into the GIS in real time, and that was kind of the backbone of the existing conditions. We not only were mapping where the physical assets were in terms of the sites, but we also were starting to evaluate the actual condition. So if we got to a location that maybe had flood damage from high water and some previous high water event, we were able to record that. If there was graffiti, we know that there's always vandalism. We gave some rating of how much vandalism, what's the significance of the vandalism, because that had to help inform what the management or maintenance challenges were going to be in a later kind of exercise of kind of ferreting all this stuff out. So the map that's up on the screen shows all those different points of the access. And when you went to this all goes into a web map. The URL is floating around out there in the public. You can zoom in and you can start it'll start revealing more information, and you can literally click on links and it shows you the actual photos. So it became kind of the backbone of what we needed to understand of what we had, what we were working with as a starting point. Next slide. That led then into an important point is the gap analysis itself. So gap analysis in water trail or any trail planning is where I have limited amenities or have limited opportunities to actually get onto our linear feature, whether it's a land bike trail or it's a water trail. And so what we did is we went through some metrics, used the GIS data and the locations of the access points, and created these thermal maps. So the very dark purple plum color is where we have the highest access. And then as it begins to taper out, in the case of the Pittsburgh region, in our 4 rivers that we have, Yacht is included in the analysis as well, anything in Allegheny County. You'll see at the top of the slide, the little orange diamonds, those represent where the locks and dams are. So in the Pittsburgh region, we have these man-made obstacles that for many paddlers almost become kind of the end point of where they're going to paddle, because a lot of people in the survey and all the interviews just reinforce this. Friends over the years has tried to overcome this, and it'll be a continued effort. People don't like locking through. It's a scary thing, whether it's a safety standpoint or it's just terrifying to get into the chamber and be with all these other motorboats and other stuff. Like there's something about that. So you'll see that in this case, this is only a portion of the river that we have on the slide, but the pattern, we always taper out as we get closer to locks and dams. And so our access really is kind of organized based on these different rooms, these different pool areas that we have on our rivers. And so we get these hot spots where we'll see the dark plum color, where we have lots of access and a lot of activity. And then as we radiate away towards the locks and dams, it really tapers off quickly, and we get to those lighter shades of orange. So the gap analysis was important to help inform where we needed to have new access points in the future. Carla, next one. So one of the things that Friends really wanted to unravel was back to the equity and accessibility side. So there's accessibility from, I have mobility challenges. How do I actually get from a plateau and a parking lot actually down to the water level? And, with any of you are familiar with the riverfronts, we typically have river banks. And in the Pittsburgh region, they're often at least 20 feet high. So how do I get a handicap ramp down there? That's one level of access. The second was actually transit. And from the transit side of this, we took all the transit routes that traced basically the lines that traced the river communities or as close to the riverfronts as we could. So we took those lines, put basically proximity, took all the bus stops, or if we were on a rail line, took where those stops were, put a 1/4 mile radius on from those stops, and found where all the gaps were. And the point of going through this was to understand if somebody just wanted to go fishing, how would they ever find on the water trail from where they live, where's the most likely place or the most convenient place for them to go fish? Or if I just want to read a book by the river, whatever. Surprisingly, while a lot of people reported they get to the water trail by car today, they do want to go by transit in the future. So this was something that, again, from a recommendation standpoint, becomes pretty important. Next slide. So locks and dams, I mentioned this, I'm not going to go through this, but you can now see this pattern where we have, this is around Neville Island, downstream, so Swickley, Edgeworth is up at the upper left corner, downtown would be in the upper right corner, or the lower right corner. You'll see, again, there's a fade on the slide, but you'll see that there's a intensity of use on the pool, which in this case would be the Pittsburgh pool, on that lower right side, and then I hit the locks and dams at Neville Island. I can only go through on the main stem. That's where the lock is. There's nothing on the back channel to get through. Then it picks up again as I get further down the island, where the blue dot is the Glenfield fishing boat access that you see right in the middle of the map. These really become a challenge and really helped inform the recommendations themselves. And then the last slide, and I'll transition over to Carla, is what we did with all this information is we created these profiles of every one of the access points. And so this was almost like, when you, in the old days when you went to AAA, you got a triptych and you were doing a trip where you go to St. Louis, and I literally get my triptych and it tells me where all the stops are. And it gives a profile of what is at each of those individual stops. We kind of organized in the same way. All the GIS information that we had collected informed, basically populated the table, but within the management plan, now we have a very quick way of somebody being able to quickly pace through, understand what amenities are there, whether they are meeting ADA accessibility, do they have an actual ADA launch, etc., down to even the competency level for a paddler. So evaluating the water in terms of whether it's an area that's in a swift current, whether it's exposed to wind, etc., gave basically a red, yellow, green kind of rating in terms of that. Carla, you want to pick it up here?
Sure. So moving into some of the recommendations that we've made, we kind of broke them down into different sections. So we've got programming, promotional marketing, physical improvements, and operational. The programming recommendations revolve mostly around building upon what Friends of the Riverfront is already doing. They've got a lot of very strong partnerships with different organizations that are involved in recreation, outdoor recreation in the riverfront. And so it's building upon those partnerships to maybe reach out further and to meet the goals of getting more people onto the river, and then also getting people who already visit the rivers and already use the rivers to use them more. Because what we've learned is they are such a great asset to our region, but so many people, because of the history of our region where the riverfronts were used for industry and they were not always considered safe or nice places to be, people just don't think of them as a place for recreation. So one of the goals was to get more people out there, and through the partnerships and through education and community engagement, some of the recommendations are to help get more people out onto the rivers. And then on the promotional and marketing side, Friends of the Riverfront has been working on some branding and some signage that would kind of bring all of the different access points, pull them together and kind of create a uniform branding opportunity so that people on the riverfront or at the access points sort of have this familiarity and this uniform sort of signage that they associate with the Three Rivers Water Trail. And then beyond that, building upon what Friends is doing on their social media, using social media campaigns to get people out in the water, and their website to create maybe some opportunities for different themed trips, things like that, to get people to get more information out there to people. And then the physical improvements, we'll talk further about this, is really just about looking at the amenities and the accessibility at the water access points and making recommendations for how to improve the existing water access points and also the proposed water access points. And then beyond that, one of the biggest things that I think is kind of a challenge for Friends of the Riverfront is that all of these access points are owned by different entities. So there are over 20 different partners that are responsible for the maintenance, and everybody's kind of doing their own thing. So creating a set of standards. Some of them are maintained by municipalities, some of them are privately maintained. So there are different levels of capacity that the maintainers have. And so trying to kind of make that more uniform so that, where one water access point maybe has a certain set of amenities or standards for cleanup, they can kind of bring them all to the same level.
And Carla, the only thing I put an exclamation point on this one. 20 different maintainers. So think of this. If we had, this is no different than our road systems where one municipality maintains their streets to a certain level. And the next municipality, even though it's the same road goes in that municipality, may be maintained at a different level. Because this is thought of as an amenity, and potentially a regional destination or a national destination, that impression is really important. So like this picture of the kayak rack itself, when it's overgrown and a visitor comes to the region and sees this, that impression is not necessarily a great impression. So to some degree, there's a little bit of, I always liken this to the Disney mentality of we have good experience. And for that visitor, whether I'm paddling there every day or I'm coming from Columbus, Ohio, for a long weekend and want to be on the river, we really have to do something about that. And it is not easy to do when you got 20 different ways of maintaining things or the impression of, and let's be honest, in most cases, because these are maintained, a lot of them by municipalities, the water access point probably doesn't fall at the top of the list. They're going to take care of their roads and streets because those are deemed essential services. So it's a reality, and that's part of the management plan, is trying to unravel that and figure out what's a reasonable strategy and expectation to have.
So I wanted to share the overall map of the existing water trail access points. You can see there are areas where there are, as AJ talked about before, there are kind of hot spots. So areas, especially near the point where there are lots of existing access points close together. And then you can start to see where there are areas along the Ohio here and the Mon especially, where there are many miles without any access points. And we also included the Youghiogheny because it's the fourth river in Allegheny County. They do belong to their own water trail, but we included them here as well. So this is the map that we kind of started out with, and from there started to analyze where the gaps were and figure out where we worked with Friends of the Riverfront to figure out where proposed access points would make more sense. And so we'll kind of take you through one of the rivers, the Monongahela, which was identified by some of the outreach that we had done. We had spoken to, I think, about 15 stakeholders. We interviewed them throughout the winter, and we did a survey and held a public meeting, and just to kind of get people's understand what people how people use the rivers, how they didn't use the rivers and want to use the rivers, and understand how we can provide better access to the rivers. And one of the things that we heard was that the Monongahela and the Ohio had a lot of gaps, kind of exactly what we had found when we did our analysis. And people were looking for more places along these rivers. The Allegheny has a lot of access points, and a lot of that is because of just the nature of industry and the terrain. So the Mon and the Ohio, if you all are from Pittsburgh or live in Pittsburgh, you know how much industry was developed along those riverfronts. So in a lot of places, it's just very difficult to get to the riverfront. There's either existing industry still, there are railroads, there's terrain, there are just a lot of obstacles in getting there. So that's kind of one of the challenges that prevents there from being lots of access points along these rivers. And we just kind of mapped out here. We measured all of the distances between all of the access points. And as you can see on the MON, there are 9 water access points with an average of 2 miles between them. And some of them are very close together, again, the ones near the point. But there are areas where there are gaps greater than 5 miles. So as you get further away from the city, there are lots of gaps. One thing I also wanted to mention was that there's still a lot of industrial traffic on the Mon and the Ohio. So that's another challenge is, lots of barges. People are kind of unsure and intimidated by the industrial traffic and tend to not use those rivers as much. And again, the locks and dams, 2 of them on the Mon.
And Carla, just to put a bow on the whole discussion. So the distance between point 31 and 29. So 31 is Port View, right there at the marina at McKeesport on the Port View side. 29 is up in Elizabeth. So that's over 5 miles. And any of you that are paddlers, so the point of this is if I left 29 to paddle to 31, I'm going downstream. That is a 5 mile. That's going to be a good morning paddle. To turn around and make it back to 29 turns it into a full day, and I'm paddling back upstream. And I went through Clarendon Works, which, to Carla's point she just mentioned, is a heavily trafficked area. Like that would be in the middle of the afternoon now. That's a big gap. So those are the types of things in the plan, looking at other locations where we could have a different point. And this is always a challenge with the water trail. Are you planning for somebody to leave 29 and go to 31 or vice versa? That they need to have then a place to drop a vehicle. They're going to have to pull their boat out, rack it, put it somewhere while they take the car to go get their other vehicle to come back and pick up the car or pick up the boat. There's all those dimensions that had to get thought through as we're looking at these potential gaps. And then on top of that, availability of a site. Because a good bit, if you look at the map, you have Clarendon kind of in the middle on the west bank, and on the east side is Lincoln. And any of you that are familiar with that, there's a railroad track and a cliff. Lincoln itself is up on top of the bluff. There's not really any accessible land on the Lincoln side. In Clarendon, half of the city of Clarendon is dedicated to the Coke Works itself. So that one was definitely a challenge. And so evenly spacing these things is probably not a reality. And while we added some access points, we still have some large stretches that are probably still in the 3 mile range, but at least we started narrowing it down and getting them a little bit closer to where they really need to be.
So the orange circles indicate the proposed access points that the areas that we're proposing adding. And so we took we added 7 and reduced the mileage between the access points. So again, you can kind of see the gap here is starting to close a little bit. We're adding some more access points in. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah, we can.
You can? Okay. So right in this area where it's pretty dense and there is a lot of, this is still the city of Pittsburgh here. So this would be Hazelwood. This is down near, well, this is the waterfront. This is Baldwin. So areas where there is a lot of activity, it's very dense. And then as you get further out from the city where past McKeesport, again, it's a little more, it's less dense. There's, again, the area where there's a cliff and not necessarily a lot of opportunities, but starting to add some more access to the river in these spaces, and even down all the way to this. I can't even remember what this is. Buena Vista, way down towards the the Fayette County and Allegheny, or I mean the Westmoreland
It's
County
Elizabeth
lines.
Township.
That's okay. That is Elizabeth.
Well,
Okay,
not
this
far
was-
up the township. It's the far end of the township.
Right.
Carla, time check. It's 10:35.
Okay. Thank you. The second kind of major part of the recommendations, as far as the physical recommendations, are providing some design guidelines for the access points. Because they all are very different, they all have different amenities. We thought that it made sense to kind of standardize what was needed for a typical access point. And as we started to think about, what was available, where some of these access points are, we realized they're all very different. And so we started to categorize them into different typologies. And we created 4 typologies that we'll go through. So kind of making a different type of access point. So those are divided into a river destination, a neighborhood access, a primitive experience, and a float-in. And again, we'll go through those. And then beyond the access point typologies, we developed a set of design guidelines. So it's almost like a palette of standards that can be applied to different typologies. And that would include the things like the launch type, the parking, the restrooms, and all of the amenities. And some of the amenities would be available at, for example, a river destination would have many more amenities than a primitive experience or a float-in. And this is just an image here of what Friends of the Riverfront has developed as far as signage to start to kind of create some standards at these access points. So getting into the typologies. The first typology that we've developed is called the river destination. So this is intended to be exactly what it says, a destination, a place where people can come from out of town even, and they have everything that they need. So it's a full set of amenities and services for people who live here and people who are visiting. So think things like nearby restaurants, places to stay, and then the full set of accessible, from the parking lot to the launch, an ADA accessible boat launch. And all of the routes to the launch would be accessible as well. Places to store your equipment. This is something that we've got 33 access 33 access points currently, and none of I think only one of them has a designated full ADA accessible kayak launch. So thinking about maybe creating at least one river destination access point on each river to create a place where people can come and get everything they need. There are no places really for people to, if they're doing an overnight trip, if they're coming and they're doing, more than just kind of getting out and getting back into the water, places where they can store equipment, places where they can eat, things like that. And some of the examples that we're showing are this one here in Toronto, and then another one in Tampa. So these are cities, big cities have done this and kind of use these as precedents as far as what can be developed in the city of Pittsburgh. And we'll get into after this some of the access points that we have designated as a type 1 river destination. The second is neighborhood access. So most of the access points along the rivers will fall under this category. These are access points that are typically visited by people in the neighborhood, people that use them often. And these would also have accessible parking, an accessible route to the water, not necessarily an accessible boat launch, but it gets people to the water. There are a lot of people who use the access points for things like fishing and wildlife viewing. So we want to kind of get beyond thinking that the water trail is just for people in a boat. And especially when we're trying to attract people from the surrounding neighborhoods. One of the things that we heard when we did the outreach was that most of the people that responded to the surveys were coming from non-riverfront neighborhoods. So we want to start to engage more with the people who live right along the riverfronts. And a lot of those people are the people who use them for fishing and just for, a place to go for respite. The third typology that we have is the primitive experience. So these are, this is the third most, or maybe the second most popular typology here. And this would be areas where maybe it's typically a natural beach. There isn't a dock, there isn't a ramp. It's just a beach for you to kind of pull up onto. There's not going to be necessarily an accessible route. To some of the areas just are not very amenable to having an accessible route. And then you'd also have benches and tables, places for people to get out, and signage. And there aren't very many of these access points, but they tend to create a different experience, and most of them are located further out from the city center. The last type is the float in. And I think on the Monongahela, and we'll see that I don't think we currently have any float in areas.
Baldwin.
Baldwin. These would be the areas, these would be the access points definitely on the islands there. We have Sycamore Island, which I think is the only area along the water trail that has a legal camping area. And then also some areas where you cannot get to the access point easily by a car, with a vehicle, with a car or a truck. So you'd have to hike in to get there. And so a lot of these places are just exactly what the primitive experience is, a natural beach. There's not an accessible route, but there is a potential for camping and using all natural materials. And in all of the examples, we would have signage just to kind of, again, create a more uniform experience and for people to acknowledge that they are on the Three Rivers Water Trail. So these are the proposed typologies along the Monongahela. The proposed access points are the ones that look like a donut. And then the existing access points are those that are a little bit faded here. And so the type 1 destination we have proposed, it's a proposed access point, and that is at Hazelwood Green. And then you can kind of see where the rest of the types are sprinkled throughout. And what we're aiming to do is create a variety along each of the rivers. So you don't want to have the same, so that we don't have the same typology spread throughout one place, but we're kind of sprinkling them to create opportunities for different experiences. So beyond the typologies, we've also created the design palette. So all of the different criteria to meet each of the typologies that were listed would then have opportunities for different types of, for example, launches. So an ADA accessible boat launch would have the following amenities here. And then in places where there is a concrete boat ramp, we're providing some examples of what would be acceptable, including the precast concrete slabs or the concrete blocks, and then what you want to try to avoid. The articulated concrete ramp, it's something that is often used because you don't have to get a permit in order to install it, but it kind of creates a hazard. It's easy to get your feet stuck in something like this. So we're trying to create some doable solutions for future expansion and for the development of existing access points. And we have these design guidelines for all the different amenities, for parking, for things like litter and the campsites. So this is just kind of a sampling of what you would find in the management plan. And And that's all we have for now, unless anyone has anything to add. Any questions?
That was fantastic. That was an absolutely great presentation. Thank you, Carla, AJ, Kate, coming on this morning. Really enlightening. Rivers are such a valuable source in the area. So yeah, thank you so much. Round of applause. Thank you. And yeah, we can some time for questions if anybody wants to just pop off mute, ask something, or type it in the chat. Feel free. Still have some time. And the recording will be posted at some point. I'll ask something. Was there a lot of interaction with private landowners with this private property? But if so, what kind of interactions did you guys? Or some people are receptive, some folks odd as receptive. Like, is there what happened with that? So down private property.
Katie, do you want to take that one, or do you want us?
We could probably double team it a little bit. I know private property is, always going to be an issue, especially when talking about Riverfront. We have a lot of private marinas and places. We've started to kind of think about ways that we might be able to partner with these marinas that already have some of this infrastructure in place. And how could we then maybe come to them and say, hey, we would love to put an ADA boat launch here that would be available for the public. Maybe think of some creative ways to kind of partner on some of these with these private interests and
Yeah, I think to kind of build on what Katie just laid out, one of the dilemmas with the private property is a lot of cases the implementation of improvements at these access points is using public dollars. And so we get into a really messy situation that I'm just going to say a Marina A has a boat ramp. It's a logical place, to have a water access point. They may be a willing property owner. The dilemma is if we go try to get funding to say put a kayak rack in, or maybe a sunshade or a pavilion with a picnic table. Well, is it the business of the marina that is benefiting from these public dollars because their members may be using it when at other times, right? And oftentimes, like I'll just use DCNR as the example. Katie, what is it? It's a 30-year lease.
Yeah.
The marina would have to enter into a lease agreement with somebody that's the recipient of the grant dollars for 30 years. And I'm not sure some of these private property owners are willing to do that. There were instances back when we had the maps up and we were talking specifically on the Mon, like Claret. So there could be some places, or Glassport's probably a better example. So Glassport, we're proposing an access point and where they have an access on the downstream end of town. So it's closest to Portview. And Glassport has, probably 3 miles of river frontage. It's a pretty long section, but most of that is we'll say Corporation A, former steel mill that a new property owner owns, and that property owner over the years has proven not to be particularly applicable to public access on their property. I'm saying that as diplomatically as I can. If there was a change of heart, and it made a lot of sense because we could have a dot in that 5-mile section where we had that big gap that would be an ideal location. That situation, I could see working with the property owner and leasing out a half an acre or a quarter acre for that facility, only because they have so much land. So the marina dilemma, I think, oftentimes they're small little postage stamps of a property, and how you do that becomes a real problem. So, Mason, you asked a really good question. The long and short is there are some private that are in the analysis that already are a part of the water trail. And Katie would be the first to tell you they do pose a funding problem, a challenge, I should say, not necessarily a problem, a challenge. We did lean towards where we could create public access through publicly controlled land.
Mm-hmm.
So this is biased. It is leaning kind of that direction to really try to figure out how to deal with the gap analysis.
No, understood. I think that's perfect. You guys are the parks are just doing what you can, and just trying to provide access to this resource that is so iconic to the area. So,
in public, just to take that a little bit further, public by our definition doesn't mean it has to be municipally owned.
Right.
I mean, there's numerous locations that may be. It could be a SOAR authority's access point. It could be the local fire company where they have a ramp that they drop the fireboat in. That Friends over the years has been able to get some sort of agreement with them. Portview is a pretty good example of it. So public, probably the definition of public is somewhat stretched on this one. It's not in the pure municipal sense, but it's quasi-public, right?
yeah. Thank you. It's awesome. Definitely looking forward to seeing how this evolves. Anyone else want to come to the plate, ask a question? And again, this will be posted at a later date, and please check out Friends of the Riverfront. If you have any questions you don't want to ask live on air, feel free to email our wonderful presenters this morning. That was absolutely fantastic. And thank you guys so much for showing up this morning and giving a fantastic presentation. So that's all for you. Round of applause. And again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mason, and thank you everyone for joining in.